The quiet that descended upon the dining room was not the serene hush of high society reverence. It was a physical weight, thick and suffocating, the metallic ozone-charged silence that precedes a cataclysmic storm. 50 of the city's most formidable power brokers, moments ago roaring with the laughter of the untouchable, now held their breath, united by a single, unnerving focus. Their collective gaze bypassed the billionaire seated at the head of the VIP table and ignored the CEO who had just finished shouting vulgarities. They were staring at Elena, the trembling waitress whose hands gripped a serving tray like a shield. They had labeled her stupid, a piece of furniture, an invisible component of the backdrop. Yet, when Arthur Sterling, the ancient financial architect of Manhattan, posed a question that would baffle boardrooms and humble entire cohorts of Ivy League graduates, he bypassed every well-heeled attendee. His gaze settled on her, and the reply she offered didn't merely silence the room. It served as the precise, catastrophic dismantling of their entire worldview. The profound irony of employment at the Gilded Cage, Manhattan's reservations impossible ultra-exclusive steakhouse, was that success hinged entirely on achieving total invisibility. You had to master the art of being unseen, unheard, an extension of the service architecture, even while moving through a sea of patrons who were desperately starved for recognition. Elena adjusted the starch-stiff collar of her uniform, checking her reflection in the polished brass railing. At 26, she carried the deep-seated exhaustion of someone who had survived 3 separate lifetimes. Dark, bruising circles were painstakingly concealed with cheap drugstore concealer, a shade that mismatched her skin tone under the warm, pervasive amber glow of the dining room's ambient lights. Table 4 tonight, Elena, the floor manager, Mr. Holloway, slithered up, smelling of desperate peppermint and cheap polyester, a serpentine figure in a poorly tailored suit. He smelled of anxiety masked by mint. And don't mess this up. Do you even know who booked it? Elena glanced at the reservation tablet. Julian Thorpe, her gut clenched, cold and hard. Julian Thorpe wasn't just another tech mogul. He was the poster child for Silicon Valley's predatory new money, the kind of man who treated service staff not merely as subordinates, but as unfeeling, inanimate furnishings. He was currently dominating the financial news cycle for a hostile takeover of a logistics company. A ruthless, strategic move that had instantly put thousands of working families out of business. "I'll handle it, Mr. Holloway," Elena said, forcing a steady tone that belied the faint tremor in her hands. "You better," Holloway hissed, leaning closer. "The owner is here tonight, Mr. Sterling. He's going to be dining in the private alcove, watching every minute of every shift. One single mistake, Elena, and you'll be serving lukewarm coffee back in that queen's dive." Elena offered a sharp nod, her knuckles white around her serving tray. She couldn't go back to Queens. Not when her mother's medical bills were stacking up on their kitchen counter like a paper skyscraper. The weekly dialysis treatments were increasingly costly, and the insurance company was aggressively fighting them on every single claim. The Gilded Cage, for all its oppressive hypocrisy, was the only place in the city where the tips were substantial enough to guarantee the lights stayed on and the doctors were paid. She needed this night to be absolutely flawless. She moved onto the floor, the thick, hand-woven carpet swallowing the faint sound of her sensible black service shoes. The restaurant was less a place of dining and more a shrine to unapologetic excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of small automobiles hung from the coffered ceiling, casting dazzling prisms onto plates loaded with marbled Wagyu beef and decadent lobster thermidor. Table 4, situated deliberately in the center of the room, loudly established its financial dominance. Julian Thorpe, a man in his early 30s with a meticulously sculpted haircut that likely cost more than Elena's aging car, sat radiating entitlement. His smile never once reached his cold, predatory eyes. He was flanked by his entourage. 3 identical-looking men in Navy power suits and 2 women, Vanessa and Chloe, draped in expensive silk and pervasive, profound boredom. "Water," Julian commanded without even glancing up as Elena approached. He was busy scrolling on a phone that sparkled with diamonds. "And make sure it's actually cold this time. Last time I was here it was lukewarm. Disgusting." "Right away, sir," Elena said softly, retreating a careful step. And don't hover, Vanessa snapped, flipping a curtain of blonde hair over her shoulder. She looked at Elena with a mixture of pity and intense revulsion, as if financial struggle were a contagious aesthetic disease. God, Julian, why is the help here always so morbid? It ruins the ambience. Elena retreated to the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. To them, she was a ghost, an efficient, tray-carrying automaton designed to dispense water and wine. They didn't know that 3 years ago she had been a doctoral candidate at MIT, specializing in advanced game theory and behavioral economics. They didn't know she had walked away from that future the day her father died and her mother became terminally ill, sacrificing her entire intellectual trajectory to save her family. To them, she was simply the waitress. As she cracked open a fresh bottle of San Pellegrino, she glanced toward the back of the room. The private alcove was heavily shadowed, but she could clearly discern the rigid silhouette of an old man sitting alone. Arthur Sterling, the billionaire recluse who controlled half the city's commercial real estate. He was definitely watching. By 8:12 p.m., the restaurant was at capacity. The noise level emanating from Table 4 had risen in direct correlation with the number of $500 bottles of Napa Cabernet they had consumed. Elena approached the table to clear the appetizer plates. She moved with the silent, practiced precision of a professional dancer, stacking the fine china without a single clink, maintaining her professional invisibility. So, the merger is basically done? Julian was boasting, his voice booming across the dining room. I told the board that if they didn't accept the buyout offer, I'll tank their stock price by Monday. The simple leverage. Find the weakest point and apply maximum pressure until it fractures. You're brutal, Julian. One of the suits laughed, raising his glass in tribute. That's why you're the king. It's not brutality, Julian corrected, leaning back and stretching his legs out, nearly hooking her ankle with his leather shoe. It's intellect. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to serve. It's natural selection. Take her for instance. Julian pointed the tip of a silver fork directly at Elena. She froze, a dirty plate suspended in her hand. Excuse me, sir? Elena asked, keeping her tone meticulously neutral. You, Julian said, a smirk spreading across his face. You're doing a fine job, but let's be honest. You're here because this is your ceiling. You're paid to carry plates. I'm paid to move markets. It's strictly a matter of measurable cognitive capacity. The table erupted in synchronized, cruel laughter. Vanessa giggled, covering her mouth. Oh, stop it, Julian. You're embarrassing her. Look, she's turning red. I'm just stating facts, Julian insisted, his eyes glittering with malice. Tell me, darling, what's 15% of $3,450? That's the tip I might leave if you manage not to drop anything else tonight. Can you do that in your head? Or do you need to fetch your little calculator? Elena tightened her grip on the plate. The number flashed across her mind instantly, calculated through years of competitive math training. It's $517.50, sir, Elena said quietly. Julian blinked, momentarily surprised for a microsecond before his colossal ego instantly recovered. Lucky guess. Or perhaps you've just memorized the tip chart for big spenders. Is there anything else I can get you, sir? Elena asked, completely ignoring the insult. She needed to escape the immediate proximity of the table before she lost her professional composure. Yes, Vanessa piped up, her voice petulant. This steak is undercooked. I asked for medium rare. This is practically raw. Take it back. Elena glanced down. The steak was a textbook medium rare, pink in the center with a deeply seared crust. Perfect plate. But the customer, especially the one draped in investment-grade diamonds, was always right. I apologize, ma'am. I'll have the chef prepare a new one immediately. As Elena reached for the plate, Vanessa, with a calculated shift of her silk-draped elbow, clipped Elena's wrist. The plate tipped violently. A substantial piece of filet mignon, thoroughly dripping in peppercorn reduction sauce, slid off the china and landed squarely on Julian Thorpe's pristine white dress shirt. Time seemed to atomize. The wet splatter of the dark brown sauce on the immaculate Egyptian cotton was deafeningly loud in the sudden, catastrophic silence. Julian stared down at his chest in genuine horror. Then his face turned a violent, alarming shade of purple. "You incompetent idiot!" Julian roared, leaping to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the expensive marble floor, instantly drawing the eyes of every patron in the restaurant. I'm so sorry, sir," Elena gasped, grabbing a napkin and reaching out instinctively to help. "Don't touch me." Julian swatted her hand away hard. "Look at this. This is a custom keten shirt. Do you have any idea how much this costs? You couldn't afford the buttons on this shirt in a year of working here." "It was an accident," Elena stammered, looking helplessly at Vanessa. "She bumped my arm." "Excuse me?" Vanessa gasped, clutching a long strand of pearls in a dramatic performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. "I did no such thing. You clumsy girl. Don't you dare blame me for your incompetence." Mr. Holloway materialized instantly, his face a mask of slick terror, looking physically sick. "Mr. Thorpe, I am so sorry. What happened?" "This girl threw food on me," Julian shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at Elena. "She's useless. I want her fired now. Get her out of my sight and comp this entire bill, or I will purchase this entire building and turn it into subsidized hourly parking just to spite your pathetic establishment." "Of course, Mr. Thorpe." Immediately, Holloway turned to Elena, his face hard and devoid of human sympathy. "Elena, kitchen. Now, you're done." "Mr. Holloway, please," Elena pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "It wasn't my fault. Vanessa hit my arm. I need this job. Go." Holloway snapped. Elena felt the sharp, hot sting of utter failure in her eyes. The deep humiliation was burning her skin. She turned to leave, her head bowed low, ready to accept the crushing defeat. She had failed. Her mother's medication, the monthly rent, it was all gone because of a spoiled rich woman's boredom. "Wait." The voice was low, gravelly, and commanded instant, paralyzing obedience. It cut through the sudden, hysterical noise of the restaurant like a high-tension blade. From the shadows of the back alcove, a figure emerged. Arthur Sterling moved slowly, leaning heavily on a cane topped with a tarnished silver wolf's head. He was 80 years old, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored in another era. His face was a deeply mapped geography of lines, but his eyes were startlingly sharp, an unnerving blue, and terrifyingly intelligent. He walked limped toward table 4. The room went deathly silent once more. Even Julian Thorpe quieted down, shrinking almost imperceptibly. Arthur Sterling was more than just money. He was a legend, the money behind the money. Julian might have been a flashy millionaire tech bro, but Arthur Sterling was the industrialist billionaire who had literally financed and built the city's underlying infrastructure. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice suddenly oily and profoundly respectful. "I didn't know you were dining here tonight. I apologize for the scene. This waitress." "I saw what happened," Sterling interrupted. He stopped at the table, looking down at Julian with unconcealed disdain. "I saw the young lady reach for the plate, and I saw your fiancée check her reflection in her knife and deliberately knock the girl's arm." Vanessa went instantly pale, the color draining from her lips. I didn't." "Silence," Sterling said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute and final. He turned his attention to Elena. "What is your name?" "Elena, sir," she whispered. "Elena," Sterling repeated. He looked at her hands, which were perpetually red from work, and then directly into her eyes. "Julian here says you are incompetent. He says you have a low cognitive capacity. He believes he is the smartest man in this room." Sterling turned back to Julian. "Do you think you're a genius, boy? Because you wrote some code and managed to swindle a few pension funds?" Julian straightened his bespoke jacket, attempting to regain a shred of dignity. "I have an IQ of 145, Mr. Sterling. My track record speaks for itself. I don't see why we are discussing this with the help." "Let's test that," Sterling said, a thin, wicked smile curling on his lips. I have a standing rule, Julian. I don't let idiots eat in my restaurant, and I certainly don't allow them to abuse my staff. Sterling reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. He tossed it carelessly onto the pristine white tablecloth. I have a problem I've been mulling over, Sterling said. A question. If you can answer it correctly, Julian, I will pay for your meal. I will pay for your ruined shirt. In fact, I will invest $10 million into your new company tomorrow morning. The entire restaurant gasped audibly. $10 million just for answering a question. Julian's eyes lit up immediately. Greed instantly replaced his anger. And if I get it wrong, then you leave, Sterling said, his voice hardening. You are permanently banned from all my properties for life. And you apologize sincerely to Elena. Julian laughed. A sharp, confident sound. Deal. I've never failed a test in my life. Ask me. Sterling leaned heavily on his cane, scanning the entire room. He addressed the whole restaurant, but his focus was pinned on Julian. This is a question of logic, but also of observation. Imagine you are a prisoner in a land ruled by a mad king. The king offers you a chance at freedom. He brings you to a room with 3 doors. Julian nodded, looking bored again. The Monty Hall problem. Easy. Pick a door. He opens one with a goat. You switch. Probability increases to 66%. Next question. Interrupt me again, Sterling said softly, his voice a low threat. And you lose by default. Julian clamped his mouth shut instantly. It is not the Monty Hall problem, Sterling corrected. Listen closely. Behind one door is freedom. Behind the other 2 are executioners who will kill you instantly. You must choose a door. Sterling held up one finger. Here is the twist. The king has 2 guards standing by the doors. One guard always lies. One guard always tells the truth. But you do not know which is which. Furthermore, the guards themselves do not know what is behind the doors. However, there is a sign above the doors written in a dead language. Both guards can read the sign. You cannot. Sterling paused. The room was dead silent, hanging on every word. You are allowed to ask one specific question to one guard, Sterling continued. But before you ask, the king tells you this. The truth teller will only answer if you ask about the future. The liar will only answer if you ask about the past. If you ask the wrong type of question to the wrong guard, they will both remain silent, and you will be executed. Sterling leaned in close to Julian. What is the single question you ask to guarantee you find the door to freedom? Julian blinked rapidly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He pulled out his phone instinctively, but Sterling slammed his cane down on the table, the sharp impact startling Julian. And no technology, boy, just your brain. You have 2 minutes. Julian started sweating. He rubbed his temples vigorously. Okay. Logic tables. If I ask the liar about the past. No, wait. I don't know who the liar is. If I ask, will the other guards say this door is safe? No, that's a nested Boolean. The constraints are the time tense, past and future. The seconds ticked by, loud in the silence. Julian muttered to himself desperately. If I ask, did you wake up today? No, that doesn't help with the door. If I ask, will the sun rise tomorrow? That's future, but doesn't help with the door. Julian looked at his friends. The suits looked utterly blank. Vanessa looked profoundly bored. 1 minute, Sterling said. It's impossible, Julian snapped, throwing his hands up. The constraints are contradictory. If I don't know who is who, I can't know which tense to use. If I use the future tense and I pick the liar, he stays silent and I die. If I use the past tense and pick the truther, he stays silent and I die. There's a 50-50 chance of death just by speaking. There is no logical solution. It's a trick question. Is that your answer? Sterling asked, his eyes cold. That there is no solution? Yes, Julian said arrogantly, regaining a small measure of confidence. It's a flawed paradox. The parameters prevent a deterministic outcome. Anyone who says otherwise is lying or incompetent. Sterling smiled, but it was a cold, sad, disappointed expression. Wrong. He turned his head slowly. His gaze swept past the expensive suits, past the sparkling diamonds, and locked eyes with the woman standing by the service station holding a dirty, sauce-splattered rag. "Elena," Sterling said. Elena looked up, startled, the sudden attention paralyzing her. "You were studying at MIT before you had to leave us, weren't you?" Sterling asked, a statement, not a question. Julian scoffed loudly, attempting to interject. "Her? She's a waitress." She dropped a plate. "Quiet," Sterling commanded. He looked at Elena with intense scrutiny. "Elena, can you answer the question?" Elena hesitated. She looked at Julian's sneering, entitled face. She looked at the guests who had ignored her all night, rendering her invisible. Then she looked at Sterling, and she realized something profound. This wasn't just a riddle. It was an interview, a test of pure cognitive resilience under pressure. She took a deliberate step forward, her voice trembling slightly at first but gaining remarkable strength. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I can answer it." "Go ahead," Sterling said. Elena took a deep, centering breath. "The key isn't just the guards. It's the sign." Julian laughed loudly, maniacally. "The sign is in a dead language," he said. "You can't read it, you stupid." "I can't read it," Elena cut in, her voice suddenly sharp and decisive, silencing Julian instantly. "But the guards can." She turned back to Sterling. "The constraint is that I can only ask one question. And I have to navigate the truth/liar dynamic and the past/future dynamic simultaneously. The only way to bypass the dynamic is to make the question a tautology that forces the state of the door to be revealed regardless of the tense or the guard's identity." Elena walked up to the table, stepping deliberately into the space Julian had just vacated. "You don't ask about the door directly. You ask about the reading of the sign." "Explain," Sterling said, his eyes beginning to twinkle with interest. "I would pick a guard at random," Elena said. "And I would ask, if I had asked you yesterday what the sign says, would you have said it leads to freedom?" The room was silent as people tried desperately to process the layered logic. Elena continued, breaking down her mental process. "If I am talking to the truth-teller, I am asking about the past, yesterday. But the truth-teller only answers about the future. However, by phrasing it as a hypothetical conditional, if I had asked, I am actually asking him to predict a consistency in his own truthfulness which projects into the future of his own logic." She paused and shook her head slightly. "No, that's too complex for a standard riddle. There is a simpler way involving the sign." She looked at Sterling again. "I would ask, will the other guard say that the sign read that this door was safe in the past?" "No," Julian shouted, desperate now. "The tense. You have to use the right tense." "Exactly," Elena said. "So you combine them. You ask in the future tense. Will the other guard confirm that the sign read that this door was safe in the past?" Julian looked utterly confused, rubbing his neck. "That's gibberish." "It's not," Elena said confidently. "But actually, Mr. Sterling, there is a loophole in your riddle that these men missed because they never look at the details." Sterling raised an eyebrow, a clear invitation. "Toe? You said the guards stand by. You said there is a sign. You said the guards can read it. You didn't say the sign was the only way to distinguish the doors." Elena pointed to the leather notebook Sterling had thrown on the table. "You also said the king offers a chance at freedom. If the king is offering the chance, then the executioners are his servants. If the guards are standing by, they are also his servants. The real question isn't for the guards." Elena took a breath, the intellectual gears grinding to a decisive halt. "The answer is, you don't ask the guards anything. You look at the floor." "The floor?" Julian asked, dumbfounded. "Executioners have to clean up," Elena said grimly, her voice low and practical. "The path to the execution rooms would be worn differently. Or, if the king wants you to choose and he is mad, he isn't playing a game of flawless logic. He is playing a game of power and intimidation." Sterling started to chuckle, a dry, rasping sound that echoed in the silence. "You are overthinking it, child. But you are far closer than him. Go back to your first instinct, the embedded conditional." Elena nodded, refocusing her intensity. She cleared her throat again. "Okay. The definitive answer, bypassing the tense restriction, is achieved by asking a self-referential question that forces the truth out regardless of the guard's type. You ask, "Will you say yes if I ask you if this door is safe?" Elena smiled faintly. If it is the truth-teller, and the door is safe, he must say yes. The tense restriction applies, so I modify it to force the future tense. Will it be the case tomorrow that you answered yes to this question today? If it is the liar, the double negative of the lie forces the truth out. It forces a positive confirmation of the safe door. Julian slammed his hand on the table again. That's nonsense. That doesn't account for the executioners. It does, Elena said firmly, because I'm not playing the game against the guards. I'm playing it against the probability the king structured. She looked directly into Sterling's terrifying blue eyes. But the real answer, Mr. Sterling, the answer that actually solves the riddle of the Mad King and guarantees survival, is this: you don't choose a door. You ask the king to open it for you because only a king can command the executioners to stand down. Sterling smiled. A genuine, ancient, delighted smile. Stared at her, the moment stretching into a decade of silent, agonizing tension. A full, unbearable 10 seconds. Then, a single, deliberate sound cut through the heavy silence. He began to clap. Arthur Sterling's applause was not celebratory. It was a slow, measured cadence, unervingly rhythmic, and devastatingly lonely in the packed, opulent room. It sounded like the tolling of a single, slow bell. Clap, clap, clap. Brilliant, Sterling rasped. His voice filled with a genuine warmth that had been entirely absent, replaced by icy distance, when he addressed Julian moments before. Absolutely brilliant. Julian Thorpe stood utterly frozen, a statue carved from shock, his face transitioning from pale disbelief to a rich, boiling scarlet of unbridled rage. He looked wildly from the ancient tycoon to the silent waitress, unable to process the total inversion of the room's atmosphere. The power dynamic hadn't merely shifted. It had flipped so violently it threatened to snap his neck. That's fundamentally absurd," Julian stammered, his forced laugh sounding high-pitched and frantic. "That isn't the accepted answer. The solution has to be a quantifiable, logical operator. She just gave you a philosophical platitude derived from an old fable. Ask the king? That's not game theory. That's a bedtime story." Sterling stopped clapping, the abrupt silence magnifying the accusation. He leaned heavily on the polished mahogany cane, pushing off the floor and shuffling purposefully toward Julian. He stopped so close that Julian could smell the faint scent of Old Spice and power radiating from the suit. "That is why, Julian, you will never be anything more than a rich boy playing with the market's toys," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a surgical whisper. "You see the world as a series of zeros and ones, a Boolean function. You think if you crunch the numbers hard enough, you can control the outcome. But the world isn't a computer program, boy. It's people. It's leverage. It's raw, unpredictable emotion." Sterling tapped his cane gently against the floor, then pointed it directly at Elena. "She understood the parameters of the riddle better than you did because she understood the source of the constraints. The king. In business, Julian, you can devise the most exquisite, flawless algorithm in the world, but if the regulator changes the law overnight, or the market shifts its collective sentiment based on a whim, or the partner you trusted betrays you for 20 pieces of silver, your math is utterly worthless." She solved the problem by addressing the authority, the ultimate constraint, not just the logical obstacles. That, Mr. Thorpe, is what a chief investment officer does. You are merely a calculator." Julian's face turned the color of raw beef. The 50 most powerful guests gathered at the VIP table were leaning in, their hushed whispers filling the space. Phones were discreetly pulled out, illuminating faces in the dark restaurant corners. They were recording. The recognized king of tech was being mercilessly dressed down by a forgotten dinosaur in a bespoke suit, and all of it was instigated by a waitress. "I'm leaving," Julian snarled, snatching his tailored jacket from the back of his chair. "And I'm not paying for this grotesque circus. This is a setup. You planned this charade, old man." "The deal," Sterling boomed, his voice suddenly thunderous, drowning out the murmurs and rattling the silverware. The deal was that if you failed the simple test, you leave immediately, and you are permanently banned from my companies. But you also owe one small token, an apology to the woman you insulted. I will not apologize to a servant, Julian shouted, losing the last shred of his professional composure. Then I will destroy you, Sterling stated. He did not shout it. He delivered the promise with the casual certainty of a man observing the predictable turn of the tide. I own the building where your precious startup servers are housed, Julian. I own the fiber optic lines your data travels on every microsecond. I sit on the board of the primary institution that finances every penny of your debt. Sterling's eyes were cold, penetrating diamonds. Apologized to Elena. The silence that followed was denser than before, stretching for a punishing 10 seconds while Julian tried desperately to find a hint of bluff in the old man's face. He found none, only absolute, unyielding power. He looked at Elena. She stood tall, her chin slightly elevated. No longer the timid, invisible waitress. She was the woman who had publicly defeated him on his own turf. Sorry, Julian muttered, staring at the intricate pattern on the carpet. Like you mean it, Sterling commanded, the order sharp as a pistol shot. Julian ground his teeth so hard his jaw ached. He forced his eyes up, meeting Elena's gaze, the flames of pure, professional hatred burning in his pupils. I apologize for my inexcusable behavior. You are undeniably clever. Thank you, Mr. Thorpe, Elena said coolly, her voice perfectly level. Your table is cleared now. Julian stormed out, grabbing his entourage who scrambled to follow him like a pack of rats fleeing a rapidly sinking ship. Vanessa, Julian's handler, shot Elena one last look of pure, concentrated venom. A silent, lethal promise of future retribution, before disappearing out the door. When they were gone, the restaurant slowly, tentatively returned to a murmur, though every eye remained fixed on table 4. Sterling turned his full attention to Elena. Walk with me, child. Mr. Halloway, the manager, rushed forward, sweat profusely plastering his thinning hair to his forehead. Mr. Sterling, please allow me to handle her punishment. I'm so terribly sorry she disrupted the atmosphere. Quiet, Halloway. Sterling snapped, not even bothering to look at him. If you ever speak to her with that patronizing tone again, you will be scrubbing grease traps in the back kitchen by dawn. He led Elena away from the main dining floor to a private alcove, a shielded booth draped in heavy velvet curtains. He sat down and, with surprising courtliness, gestured for her to sit opposite him. Elena, he said, pouring her a crystal glass of water himself. Tell me honestly, why is a mind like yours carrying trays? Elena felt the sudden, massive rush of adrenaline crash, leaving her body weak and shaky. Her hands started to tremble visibly. My father died 3 years ago, sir, she managed, her voice thin. He had accumulated significant debts, and my mother suffers from progressive kidney failure. The necessary dialysis treatments, the medication, it costs nearly $6,000 a month out of pocket. I needed quick, immediate cash flow. The tips here are reliably good. You were at MIT, Sterling stated, his eyes narrowed, studying her. Game theory, specializing in asymmetric information. Yes, sir. I checked your file while you were serving the appetizers, Sterling admitted, confirming his invasive scrutiny. You published an aggressive, highly technical paper on information leverage in hostile corporate negotiations when you were only 22. I read it in full last night. It was entirely theoretical, Elena demurred. My company, Sterling Industries, is a global entity worth roughly $40 billion. I employ nearly 10,000 people worldwide. And do you know what my single biggest problem is? Elena slowly shook her head, unable to break his gaze. My board of directors is completely full of Julian Thorpes, Sterling said, looking profoundly tired, the fatigue of an empire weighing on his shoulders. Men who believe they know everything because they followed the manual. They are actively pushing to liquidate the company. They want to strip it for parts and sell the carcass to a predatory Chinese conglomerate. They think I am too old for the fight. They believe I am conveniently senile. He leaned forward, intensity returning to his eyes. I need a wolf, Elena. I do not need another MBA who is proficient only at following antiquated rules. I need someone who knows how to tear the rulebook apart and rewrite the code. Someone who can look at a rigged game, like my riddle, and find the solution outside the established constraints. He pulled a crisp, folded legal document from his inside breast pocket and slid it across the dark wood table. This is an employment contract. Not for a waitress. This is for a special strategy consultant to the CEO. Elena looked down at the paper. The listed salary figure was immense, making her breath catch painfully in her throat. It was enough to pay off her mother's catastrophic medical bills in less than 2 months. It was enough, suddenly, to buy their security and their future. Mr. Sterling, I didn't finish my degree, she whispered, the old insecurity rising. I do not care about a decorative piece of paper, Sterling said, dismissing the entire concept of formal education with a wave of his hand. I care that you just humiliated Julian Thorpe, the most arrogant man in this hemisphere, without raising your voice, without making a single logical error, and without touching him. Do you accept the terms? Elena looked at the old man. She saw not arrogance, but a raw desperation in his eyes. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was asking for immediate, vital help. When do I start? Elena asked, the transformation complete. Now, Sterling smiled, a genuine, relieved expression finally reaching his eyes. Take off that ridiculous apron. We have a corporate war to win. The transition from the dining floor of the Gilded Cage to the executive floor of Sterling Tower was anything but a neat Cinderella story. It was a rapid, agonizing baptism by fire. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the riddle. Elena was no longer wearing a starch-stiff apron. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer and trousers that she had bought, terrifyingly, on credit. She sat at the right hand of Arthur Sterling, the designated second-in-command. But the view from the top wasn't beautiful. It was terrifying and treacherous. The corporate term for her new position was the glass cliff. The observed phenomenon when a company in deep trouble promotes a woman or minority to a high-risk leadership role, ensuring that when the inevitable crash happens, there is a convenient scapegoat ready to blame. The boardroom smelled strongly of polished mahogany, ancient, entrenched old money, and the metallic tang of fresh shark blood. 12 men in flawlessly cut Italian suits sat around the heavy oval table, staring at Elena as if she were a dirty stain marring the imported Persian carpet. This is preposterous, Arthur, hissed Marcus Vane, the chairman of the board. Vane was a slippery, dangerous man with silver hair perfectly coiffed and a smile that always looked like a jagged surgical wound. He tapped a heavy gold pen against the mahogany surface, the sound echoing sharply. The shareholders are in open revolt. The stock is down 4% just on the unsubstantiated rumor. You pull a waitress off the floor, someone who was literally serving us appetizers a month ago, and appoint her as head of strategy. It's senile. Plain and simple. It's insight, Marcus. Sterling grunted, eyes closed. He sat at the head of the table, looking distinctly friendlier than he had in the restaurant, as if the stress of the hostile takeover was consuming him cell by cell. Elena has a unique mind for patterns, a crucial quality this board demonstrably lacks. Patterns? Vane scoffed, looking around the room for required validation. The other directors chuckled darkly, their laughter cruel and dismissive. Does she see patterns in the silverware drawer? Arthur, we need to accept the Omnicorp buyout. $60 a share is a golden parachute for all of us. We sell now, we retire wealthy, and the company is absorbed quietly. It is the only logical move available. Elena sat silently, her hands folded neatly on top of a thick stack of printed corporate files. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she held herself rigid. They weren't just dismissing her. They were actively trying to erase her very existence from the room. Elena, Vane said, his voice dripping with mock politeness, heavy with insinuation. Since you are the head of strategy now, perhaps you can be useful and fetch us some coffee. It is, after all, your area of established expertise. The room erupted in a short, Sharp burst of cruel laughter. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't look down or break eye contact with Vane. She remembered the solution to the riddle. Don't play their rigged game. Change the rules entirely. I won't be getting coffee, Mr. Vane, Elena said, her voice steady and unervingly controlled, cutting instantly through the tail end of the laughter. But I will, however, be saving you all from a federal indictment. The laughter died immediately. Vane narrowed his already thin eyes. Excuse me? Elena stood up. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a predator that had just located its prey. She connected her tablet to the main projector system. Gentlemen, you are all urgently pushing to sell Sterling Industries to Omnicorp because you collectively believe our physical assets are depreciating. Elena began, pacing the front of the room with confidence. Specifically, you think our land holdings in Nevada are barren, valueless desert. I spent the last 3 weeks analyzing geological surveys from 1995 compared to modern satellite thermal imaging data. She clicked a button. A spectral heat map instantly appeared on the large screen, glowing with intense patches of red and orange. This isn't barren rock, gentlemen, Elena declared. This is a spectrographic signature for high-grade lithium, the kind used in high-capacity EV batteries, the kind of resource that runs the world economy right now. A shocked, low murmur went through the room. I sent a private geological team out last week to confirm the finding. Elena continued, pressing her advantage. If you sell to Omnicorp for $60 a share, you are effectively handing them a mineral deposit conservatively valued at $40 billion. You are essentially selling a gold mine for the price of a parking lot. Vane surged to his feet, his face flushing violently red. This is pure speculative nonsense. A waitress reading geological maps. You are clearly hallucinating. It's not speculation, Elena said, slamming a dense, bound report onto the polished table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. It's confirmed. And here is the truly interesting part, Mr. Vane. I looked into the acquiring company. Omnicorp isn't purchasing us directly. They are utilizing a shell company, a classic cutout called Redstone Logistics. She clicked the remote again. A dizzying web of complex financial transactions appeared, tangled and purposefully obscure. I traced the ultimate ownership of Redstone. It's buried under 3 layers of offshore trusts in the Cayman Islands, designed to be untraceable. But guess whose name appears prominently on the initial incorporation documents as the silent trustee? Elena pointed a laser pointer, the red dot stark and accusatory, at the bottom of the screen. Marcus Vane. The silence in the room was absolute and devastating. It was the silence before a thermonuclear device detonates. You aren't trying to sell the company to save the shareholders, Elena accused, her voice ringing out with clarity. You are selling it directly to yourself. You are actively suppressing this lithium report so you can buy the company dirt cheap, then announce the discovery once the deal closes and pocket the billions. It's textbook fraud. It's insider trading. And it is outright theft. Vane looked as though he had been physically struck. The other directors immediately turned, suspicion and calculation dawning rapidly in their eyes. You little insolent rat, Vane whispered, his carefully constructed composure finally shattering. You dare accuse me? You are a nobody. I am the person standing between you and federal prison. Elena shot back. No, Marcus. I am the person standing between you and prison. Enough! Vane shouted, slamming his heavy fist on the table, making the crystal water glasses jump. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence, not just in Arthur, but in this gold-plated charade. Arthur is clearly mentally compromised. He's being manipulated by this gold digger who cooked up a completely fake report. Vane spun to face the board members, his eyes wild and desperate. We vote on Friday at the annual shareholder gala. We will present the motion to remove Arthur Sterling as CEO and accept the Omnicorp buyout. And as for you, he pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Elena. You will be escorted out by security within the hour. You are terminated. You are finished. You can't fire her. Sterling wheezed, finally opening his eyes. She reports exclusively to me. Then we'll fire you both. Vane snarled, victorious. Friday night. The Plaza Hotel. Prepare your concession speeches. The meeting dissolved into complete chaos as the directors filed out, arguing loudly among themselves, calculating the odds. Vane stopped next to Elena's chair. He leaned in close, smelling heavily of expensive cologne and the faint, unmistakable odor of rot. You picked the wrong enemy, girl, Vane whispered, his breath hot against her ear. You think Julian Thorpe was angry about a soiled shirt? Julian is my nephew. You embarrassed him. Now you're actively messing with my legacy. By Friday, every paper in this country will know exactly who you are. We dug deep into your past. Your father didn't just have debts. He was accused of massive corporate embezzlement right before he died. We'll paint you with the exact same brush. We will make the world believe you're just a low-class thief, just like him. Elena felt the blood completely drain from her face, leaving her chilled. Her father had been innocent, framed meticulously by his former partners, but he died of a massive heart attack before he could prove his innocence. The resultant shame had nearly destroyed her fragile mother. If they dragged his name through the mud again, the exposure would kill her mother outright. Vane smiled, seeing the sudden, paralyzing fear reflected in her eyes. Checkmate. That night, Elena sat in her new, enormous corner office. The lights of Manhattan sprawling out below her like a boundless sea of diamonds she knew she couldn't touch. She felt incredibly small. The crushing weight of imposter syndrome was choking her breath. Maybe they're right, she thought, staring at her own reflection in the dark glass. I'm just a waitress playing dress-up in a borrowed suit. I took a wild swing at the Kings, and now they are going to execute me and destroy my family's memory in the process. She slowly began to pack a small box with her few personal items. She was ready to leave, to run and disappear before Friday. Then her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Did you honestly think I'd just let it go? The voice was smooth, intensely arrogant, and chillingly familiar. Julian Thorpe. Elena, Julian said, a smirk audible in his tone, her grip tightening painfully on the phone. Uncle Marcus tells me you're causing quite a fuss. Julian laughed, a cruel, short burst of sound. You know, I still have that shirt, the one you ruined with the peppercorn sauce. I look at it every day for motivation. I've spent the last 3 weeks building a little presentation for the gala on Friday. It's not about lithium, Elena. It's strictly about you. What do you want? Elena asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. I want you to resign, Julian said. Publicly. I want you to go on stage at the gala and admit you fraudulently manipulated Arthur. Admit you're wholly unqualified. Admit the lithium report is a complete forgery. And then, finally, I want you to personally serve me a celebratory drink in front of all the cameras. And if I don't comply, then I release the files on your dead father, Julian said calmly, as if discussing the weather. I have expertly doctored police reports, Elena. I have fake witness statements ready to go. I can make it look like he stole millions. I will utterly ruin his memory, permanently. And I will ensure your sick mother spends her final days being viciously hounded by the press as the wife of a convicted crook. Elena felt hot, bitter tears trace paths down her cheeks. You're a monster. I'm a winner, Elena. That's the difference between us. You have until Friday night. Don't be late with my drink. The line went dead. Elena put her head in her hands and allowed herself one moment to sob in pure despair. It was over. She couldn't possibly sacrifice her father's memory. She couldn't deliberately hurt her mother. She had to quit and run. She looked up at the reflection in the dark glass window. She saw the tired girl from the diner, the one who always kept her head down, the one who meekly absorbed the insults. But then, an instant later, she saw something else. She saw the woman who had stood up in the restaurant and won. She remembered Sterling's words, "I need a wolf." And she remembered the riddle. When the game is rigged irrevocably against you, when the guards are confirmed liars and the executioners are patiently waiting, you don't choose a door. You don't ask for permission. You become the king. Elena wiped the tears from her face. Her eyes hardened, becoming sharp and focused. Julian had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was pressing her weak emotional buttons, but he had just handed her the exact key she needed. He said he has doctored files, she thought, which means he constructed them, which means they are purely digital, which means they are sitting on a server somewhere. Julian Thorpe was a technology mogul. He lived in the cloud, and he had just threatened a woman who spent 4 intense years at MIT studying algorithmic warfare. Elena picked up her phone again. She didn't call Sterling. She didn't call the police. She dialed a number she hadn't used in 3 years, a number from a lifetime ago. "Hello, Computer Science Lab," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, more authoritative. "This is Elena. Yes, the ghost. I need a massive favor. A very big one. I need to remotely borrow the mainframe's processing power, and I need the Ghost Protocol decryption key we wrote in 2022. Elena, that code is utterly illegal." The voice on the other end whispered, alarm clear in his tone. "If you use that to breach a private server, you'll go straight to federal prison." Elena looked out at the glittering, cruel city lights. "I'm not going to prison," she murmured. "I'm going to a gala." Friday night arrived in a blinding blaze of camera flashes, heavy velvet ropes, and endless streams of chilled champagne. The Sterling Industries annual gala was held in the cavernous, opulent grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. It was a formal Shark Tank, dressed up in tuxedos. The room was a shimmering sea of black ties and designer gowns that cost 6 figures. Waiters moved through the crowd like ghosts, invisible and silent, holding trays piled high with caviar that cost more than their weekly rent. At the head table, elevated high above the rest of the attendees, sat the board of directors. Arthur Sterling sat in the center, looking desperately pale and utterly defeated. He stared at his untouched plate, his hands trembling visibly on the starched tablecloth. Beside him, Marcus Vane was holding court, clinking crystal glasses with a triumphant, smirking Julian Thorpe. "She ran away," Julian chuckled, leaning over to Vane as he adjusted his diamond cufflinks. "I told you she didn't have the stomach for the big leagues. I checked the guest list twice. She didn't check in. Security says the office is completely empty." "Good riddance?" Vane sneered, scanning the room with predatory eyes. "Now let's get this vote settled. Sign the papers and cash out our fortunes. I have a flight to the Caymans at midnight." The ballroom lights dimmed dramatically. A spotlight hit the central podium. Vane stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket with practiced formality. He walked to the microphone, his smile wide and deeply practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders, distinguished guests," Vane began, his voice smooth as silk, echoing perfectly through the massive hall. "Tonight is necessarily a night of transition. It is with a heavy heart, a very heavy heart indeed, that the board collectively recommends the immediate retirement of our founder, Arthur Sterling." A murmur of uneasy whispers filled the room. Arthur didn't look up. He looked like a man who was already attending his own funeral. "And the acceptance of the acquisition offer from Omnicorp," Vane continued, his voice hardening with resolve. "We believe this is the only financially responsible path forward." He paused for dramatic effect. "But before we cast the final, official vote, my nephew Julian Thorpe, a visionary in his own right, has a few words to say about the unfortunate mismanagement that has plagued us recently." Julian bounded onto the stage, soaking in the generous, sustained applause from his paid sycophants. He gripped the podium, looking electric and supremely confident. A giant LED screen behind him flickered to life, displaying the clean, dignified Sterling Industries logo. "Thank you, Uncle Marcus. You know, success in the modern era is predicated on complete transparency," Julian said, pacing the stage like an aggressive motivational speaker. "Recently, a dangerous fraud successfully infiltrated our company. A waitress named Elena. She claimed to be a genius. She charmed our CEO. She tried to derail this crucial merger with wild, unsupported conspiracy theories." He paused, letting the silence maximize the tension. The room was dead silent. "But I believe in truth," Julian said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried perfectly through the speakers. "I have definitive proof that she is nothing more than a common grifter, a thief, just like her father was." Julian pulled a small remote control from his pocket. He pointed it directly at the screen. "I promised her I would expose her if she didn't resign. She chose to run. So now you all get to see the truth. Here are the police reports from her father's massive embezzlement case." Julian clicked the button. The screen flickered violently, the logo momentarily distorting. Julian clicked again, frowning, his confidence faltering slightly. "I said, here are the reports. Nothing happened." The screen remained a static, ominous gray. Suddenly, a high-pitched, agonizing screech of audio feedback tore through the ballroom. Guests instantly covered their ears. The static on the screen exploded into a blinding, painful blue light. Massive, jagged white text began typing itself rapidly across the screen. Letter by letter, the sound of loud, mechanical keystrokes amplifying thunderously over the ballroom speakers. "System override. Access granted. Who is Redstone Logistics?" Julian froze completely, paralyzed on stage. Marcus Vane dropped his champagne glass. It shattered loudly on the parquet floor, the sound impossibly sharp. "What is this?" Julian screamed, spinning around toward the tech crew hiding in the back. "Cut the feed. Cut it now." "We can't." A terrified technician yelled back. "The entire system is locked." Fingers were flying across the keyboard terminal, frantic and desperate. "We're locked out." Julian's voice was sharp with panic. "It's a hard override." Before anyone could process the technical failure, the great mahogany double doors at the rear of the grand ballroom, doors thick enough to withstand a blast, were violently thrown open. The sound was a seismic boom that silenced the soft string music and rattled the crystal chandeliers above. Every single head in the room snapped around. Standing framed in the wreckage of the doorway was Elena. She was an anomaly, a sudden puncture in the perfect, polished facade of high society. She hadn't bothered with formal wear or a corporate power suit. She wore the familiar, simple black uniform of the Gilded Cage, her workplace prison. Her apron, pristine white, was knotted tight, accentuating her rigid stance. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun. In her hand, she held a gleaming silver serving tray, reflecting the ballroom lights like a shield. A collective, stunned gasp broke the silence. "It's the Waitress," a shareholder whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. Elena began her calculated march down the long center aisle. Her movement was a mesmerizing study in controlled efficiency, the exact rhythmic grace she had perfected navigating crowded, high-pressure dining rooms. The only sound in the immense, silent room was the steady, decisive tap-tap-tap of her sensible, non-slip service shoes on the polished marble floor. On the stage, Julian was frozen, his mouth agape. "Security! Get her out of here now!" He finally shrieked. Two hulking security guards, built like linebackers, moved swiftly to intercept her path. Elena didn't falter, didn't break her stride. She raised her left hand, revealing a small, dark tablet. She executed a quick tap on the screen. Instantly, the massive, state-of-the-art LED monitor looming behind Julian flickered and changed. It no longer displayed corporate logos but a horrifying, real-time live feed of financial data. The personal bank accounts of the two guards blocking her way. Red text flashed. "Incoming transfer status. Pension fund frozen. Reason: suspicion of fraud." Elena stopped directly in front of them. Her voice, calm and utterly commanding, carried through the cavernous space without needing amplification. "Step aside," she instructed, "or the FBI freezes your accounts permanently." The guards' eyes darted between the terrifying display of their decimated finances, Julian's spluttering rage, and the cold, unyielding resolve in Elena's gaze. The choice was immediate and stark. They parted like the Red Sea. Elena mounted the stage steps with the confidence of a CEO taking the floor. She approached Julian Thorpe, standing toe-to-toe with the man who had tried to destroy her. She took a moment to study his impeccably tailored, expensive tuxedo, then set her silver serving tray deliberately on the podium between them. On the tray lay a single, crisp white piece of paper, her resignation letter. She leaned into the mic, clearing her throat lightly. "You wanted me to serve you, Julian?" Elena's voice, now professionally amplified, cut through the oppressive silence. "You told me to bring you a drink. I brought you something better than that. I brought you the bill." "You're finished?" Julian hissed back, beads of panic sweat forming on his pale forehead. "I still have the files on your father, the ones that prove." "No," Elena corrected him sharply. "You had files. But you made the mistake of an arrogant, insecure man, Julian. You're a tech mogul, yes, but you stored all your invaluable blackmail material on your personal, unsecured cloud server." She turned her focus to the stunned board of directors and shareholders in the audience. "Julian Thorpe tried to hack my systems to find dirt on me," she announced, her tone accusatory and clear. "But in the unforgiving world of cybersecurity, when you open a door to steal from someone, you leave that door wide open for them to walk right back in. I didn't just block his hack. I followed the connection, the exact pathway back to its original source." She tapped the screen of her tablet again. The monitor behind her immediately switched its display. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a legal document. It was a grainy, black-and-white video timestamped just 3 days prior. The interior of a plush corporate limousine filled the screen. There sat Marcus Vane, nervously handing a thick, unlabeled black briefcase to another man. A man instantly and universally recognizable to every elite in the room. The powerful CEO of Omni Corporation. "Turn it off!" Marcus Vane shrieked from his table, leaping halfway out of his seat. His face a horrifying mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "It's a deep fake. She's using artificial intelligence." "Let's listen, then," Elena said coolly, overriding his protest. She pressed the play button. The audio track was startlingly crystal clear. It was Vane's unmistakable voice. "Don't worry about Sterling. I'm declaring him incompetent on Friday. The girl is definitely a problem, but Julian is going to blackmail her into silence. We have serious dirt on her old man." The Omnicorp CEO's voice then chimed in, followed by Vane burying his own career. "I'll sell the company to you for $60 a share. Once the deal closes, we secretly announce the lithium discovery. The stock jumps to 400. I get my $40 million kickback funneled through Redstone Logistics, and you get the mining rights for pennies on the dollar." The audio clipped off. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was crushing, heavy, absolute, and suffocating. It was the devastating, audible sound of $50 billion worth of market valuation instantly evaporating into thin air. Elena gazed down at the devastated Marcus Vane. "That isn't a deep fake, Marcus," she informed him gently. "That is live footage pulled directly from the dash cam of your own private driver's car." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "You really should pay your staff better, and perhaps treat them like human beings. It's amazing what kind of evidence people are willing to share when you treat them like they are invisible furniture." Vane collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands in silent defeat. Elena returned her attention to Julian. The tech mogul was trembling visibly, his face now the color of fresh plaster. "You asked me a riddle once, Julian," Elena said softly, leaning intimately into the mic. "The classic one. About a guard who lies, and a guard who tells the truth. You genuinely believed you were the genius who could trick the system and everyone in it." She swept her hand toward the looping video evidence on the screen behind them. "But you forgot the single most important rule of that logic puzzle," she stated, her voice hardening. "The liar always reveals himself if you just let him keep talking long enough." You waitress," Julian stammered out, his rage dissolving into incoherent, pathetic fury. "Yes," Elena confirmed, lifting her chin with immense pride. "I am a waitress, and I just cleaned up your disgusting mess." Just as she finished speaking, the secondary side doors of the ballroom burst open simultaneously. But this time they weren't catering staff. They were federal agents in dark windbreakers emblazoned with bold, yellow FBI lettering. Marcus Vane, Julian Thorpe, an agent in charge shouted, his voice demanding order. You are both under arrest for multiple counts of securities fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy. As the agents swarmed the stage and surrounded the massive head table, the room instantly erupted into pure, untamed chaos. Flashbulbs from hidden press photographers popped like relentless strobes. Shareholders shouted questions and demands into the sudden uproar. Julian Thorpe, fighting the handcuffs, was dragged off the stage, kicking and screaming useless threats until his voice cracked. Vane was led away quietly, utterly defeated and silent, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a shrunken, transparent ghost. Elena remained standing alone at the podium, basking in the sudden, blinding light. She drew a slow, deep breath, anchoring herself. Her hands, which had trembled in anticipation for months, were finally steady. Then, slowly, laboriously, Arthur Sterling rose from his seat at the center table. He leaned heavily on his silver-tipped cane. His eyes scanned the now empty seats where his betrayers had plotted, and then he looked up at the solitary woman in the black uniform on the stage. Tears of profound relief and gratitude streamed unchecked down the old man's face. He raised his hands high and began to clap. A slow, measured, resonant clap. Clap, clap, clap. A respected shareholder stood up and joined him, then another, then the confused catering staff, and finally the entire enormous room. The applause swelled from a steady rhythm into a magnificent, deafening roar. A thunderous, standing ovation that vibrated through the floor and shook the crystal chandeliers. This was not merely polite, obligatory applause. It was the raw, unrestrained sound of earned respect. Elena looked out over the sea of cheering, adoring people. She realized with stunning clarity, she was not invisible anymore. She reached up, slowly untied the knot of her apron, folded the white linen neatly, and placed it precisely beside her resignation letter on the podium. In the weeks that followed, the Waitress whistleblower scandal monopolized every news cycle globally. Marcus Vane and Julian Thorpe were swiftly indicted on sweeping federal charges of fraud, insider trading, and corporate espionage. Their considerable assets were frozen and seized, their carefully constructed reputations incinerated in the public eye. Elena did not claim the CEO chair immediately. She was too smart for that. She understood she had a steep learning curve ahead. Instead, she accepted the role of executive vice president of Sterling Industries, shrewdly managing the company's daily operations while quietly finishing her required degree at night. Utilizing the massive projected profits from the lithium project, which she had successfully saved, she didn't just stabilize Sterling Industries. She instituted a groundbreaking philanthropic program, a fund dedicated to paying full college tuition for service industry workers across the entire city, ensuring that no quiet genius would ever again be trapped behind an apron due to lack of opportunity or financial poverty. 6 months later, Elena returned to the familiar doors of the Gilded Cage, this time as a client. Mr. Halloway, the usually imperious maitre d', rushed to greet her, visibly sweating and bowing far too low. Ms. Elena, welcome back. Your usual corner table, perhaps? No. Elena smiled, shaking her head. Her gaze tracked across the busy dining floor, settling on a young, clearly exhausted waitress struggling to balance an impossibly heavy tray of plated dinners. Give me a table in her section, Elena instructed. And please bring me the best, most expensive bottle of wine you have in your cellar. I have a very, very big tip to leave tonight. The Millionaire waitress sat down, finally served after a lifetime of serving others, but never, ever forgetting the difficult, demanding weight of the tray. Sometimes the smartest, most powerful person in the room isn't the one in the perfectly tailored suit. It's the one quietly pouring the water. If you enjoyed this story of karma, justice, and rising above expectations, please smash that like button. It truly helps this channel reach more viewers. Did you manage to figure out Julian's twisted riddle before Elena solved it? Let me know your thoughts and theories down in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a future story. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.